Hello everyone, it's Pastor Howie here with another edition of Readings and Thoughts from the Scriptures. We are following the itinerary of the Apostle Paul and Barnabas as they are on their first missionary journey. So in our last video, the heading in the NIV over the first 7 verses of chapter 14 read like just a stop on the itinerary. They were in Cyprus. Now they're in Lystra and in Derbe. Excuse me, they weren't in Cyprus. Let me just double check that. They were in Iconium. They had been to Cyprus, and and in the last video they were in Iconium, and now the heading tells us in verses 8 through 20 they're in Lystra and Derbe, 2 other cities in Asia Minor. And so what we read about is something remarkable, some insight the Apostle Paul had while he was speaking to people, and we see the misinterpretation of what happened turning into a unwelcome kind of appreciation of Paul and Barnabas' ministry. I happen to be recording this video in October. I am a pastor, and this is Pastor Appreciation Month, and many churches do various things appreciating their pastors. Well, in this section, there's appreciation shown, but it's not the right kind of appreciation, and Paul reacts to that. And then there's also the exact opposite of appreciation for Paul and Barnabas at the end of this section, where they fall under persecution, nearly deadly persecution. So this is the itinerary, and if I'd been the Apostle Paul, I would think, I don't think I want to go back to these 2 cities in the near future. But let's see what this is all about. Acts chapter 14, verses 8 through 20, in Lystra and Derbe. In Lystra there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. So he had some sort of birth defect and never been able to walk. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, so I think it's significant. He listened to Paul as he was speaking, so he apparently paid very close attention. We don't know what Paul was speaking about, other than wherever he went, he shared the gospel of Jesus Christ. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed. So there is something that Paul discerned in this particular man with the help of the Holy Spirit, obviously. It may be the intensity with which he was listening and the interest that he showed. And Paul perceived that the man had faith to be healed. Didn't ask him any questions. He just perceived this. And verse 10 says he called him out. So Paul looked directly at him, saw he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk. So, the power of God working through God's servant Paul into this man's life, and we see healing very similar to the kinds of healing that Jesus did. And Jesus said that he would give power to his people. They would be witnesses to him. And this is part of that witness, that the Apostle Paul exercised the power that was given to him because he had discernment from the Spirit concerning this man, and the man was healed from a lifelong birth defect that rendered him lame, unable to walk, and now he jumps up and walks. Well, when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, which was their dialect, whatever it might be, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, which is the name of a pagan god. And Paul they called Hermes, the name of another pagan god. Zeus, represented by the planet Jupiter. Hermes, represented by the planet Mercury, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bowls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. They totally missed what Paul and Barnabas were trying to do, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ wherever they went. So we assume that's what Paul was speaking about, but because of this healing, it was so remarkable, something they didn't expect. They thought that Paul and Barnabas were some form of demigods that had come down from heaven to earth. And they wanted to appreciate that. They wanted to worship them. They wanted to do honor to them with blood and other sacrifices. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We too are only human like you. We are bringing you good news, the gospel, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God." So pagan sacrifice is worthless compared to the good news of God sending his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish but have everlasting life. God, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. We haven't done anything like that. We can't do anything like that because we're just humans, just like you are. It is God, Creator God, and God, Redeemer God, who has done all of these things. Verse 16, Paul continues and says, "In the past, he let all nations go their own way." That's the permissive will of God. Not that he didn't interfere, not that he ignored. He let the nations go their own way. Yet, he has not left himself without testimony. And here's the testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy. So Paul doesn't try to re-emphasize the preaching of the gospel. He's trying to get these people who are basically pagans, heathens, basically people who are worshiping the gods of creation as they have conceived of them. Worshiping them usually means that they were making sacrifices to these gods that controlled the things that they see in nature, not seeing the true God, the one and only God, who is the creator of all things in nature. God's fingerprints are all over the world in nature, but the things in the world that bear his fingerprints are not him. They are not divine. They are the marks of the goodness and kindness of God to humanity. And we see them all the time. And most of us in the West, in the 21st century, bypass the things, don't even see them. I mean, we see trees, we see the glory of the trees changing and all that kind of stuff, but we're so busy in our lives so we don't take time to see the fingerprints of God all around us, or the fingerprints of God in the heavens above. And so that's where the apostles reacted to these people, stopping them from sacrifice, reminding them we're just humans, just like you, and we are blessed with joy because of the abundance of goodness that God shows to us, the one true God. That's about as far as they could get, apparently, with the people that they had been speaking to, because when this man was healed by the grace and kindness of God through Paul telling him to get up, and that's all he did, the crowd just fell back on their pagan beliefs and thought that these two men were emissaries from God, which indeed they were, but they didn't come down from heaven. They weren't God's little demigods made into flesh to come and bless them. They were representatives of the one true God, the true God who provides all these things. The wind or the rain and the sunshine and the crops and the abundance of food and the joy that it brings. But even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. So we move on to the next scenario while they're still in Lystra and Derbe. Then some Jews came from Antioch. So there's a space of time here, apparently, between this event with the result of the man being healed and the crowd's reaction, and then Paul's response to them. Sometime perhaps passed, and some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. In other words, they influenced the crowd that had already seen this remarkable miracle and had been corrected by Paul concerning who he and Barnabas were, and had been sharing the good news, the gospel, with this crowd. The Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, Jews pursuing Paul and Barnabas apparently, and trying to undo anything they were teaching, because the Jews that came were not believers. They stoned Paul, dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. So Lystra wasn't a very great place for Paul, and apparently not a place where there was at least obvious success in people turning to the one true God. And then, of course, the Jews influenced the crowd, who now had been told, no, we're not gods from heaven come to bless you with healing and stuff. So that may have disappointed them. That may have just put a block in their ability to even see the truth about themselves and about the one true God and about Jesus. And the Jews took advantage of that, turned the crowd, and they tried to kill Paul. So here's one of his first severe persecutions because of being a preacher of the gospel and a preacher of a Jewish man who had turned to the gospel and caused the spite and jealousy and anger of unbelieving Jews who had rejected Jesus as the Messiah because he didn't fit their preconceived notions of what the Messiah would be like. We need to be careful in this world when we witness to people that they don't show us undue honor. We need to be careful if God blesses us in some way with a healing ministry, that people don't look more highly of us than we really are as just humans who have been saved by Christ. And we also need to know when it's time to just discern what's going on in this world and in conversations with people as to whether or not they're receptive. And if they're not receptive when we're having a conversation with them, we don't need to become angry. We don't need to be disappointed. We don't need to be reactionary in any way, but maybe it's time to just leave that conversation alone. And perhaps a seed's been planted that will grow into fruit, but it's not time yet. So may God give us discernment like he gave to Paul. Discerning a man had the faith to believe. May God give us wisdom to know when to share the gospel and when maybe to just back off and look for another opportunity. May God give us the peace to go through the kind of rejection that Paul went through by these unbelieving Jews who looked at him as a betrayer of Judaism, representing what they believed was a false Messiah because of the blindness of their own eyes and the stubbornness of their own hearts. So that's what I leave with you in this video, and the itinerary continues, as we'll see in the next video. God bless your day.